Welcome to another episode of MBA Mike. I'm your host, Rosin, and in today's episode, I speak to Divya Dewan. She's a mentor for Gen Z and Millennial women across the globe. A lot of Divya's work has revolved around motivation and presenting. In her spare time, Divya is a soprano singer and she loves drinking tea. So Divya, can you tell our audience about your background and your journey so far?
I think that growing up, I like to say that I was really raised by a tribe of musicians and a clan of female founders. So when I was about 10, I was part of a global choir called the Mozart Choir for Peace. And it was actually an initiative by two Grammy Award winners who were also best friends. One was Pandit Ravi Shankar, the sitarist, and one is Gerard Wirth, who conducts the Vienna Voice Choir. So together they created a choir where they said, let's get people from, kids from Europe, and let's get kids from India and teach both these groups Hindustani classical music and opera. And we sort of got together and performed across Europe and India over 7 years. And I think for me, that experience, which is watching these immensely talented humans, both Pandit Ravi Shankar and Gerard Wirth, I think that experience for me, watching them as I grew up, that I saw what mastery means, right? Like how no practice is created, like all practice is not created equal. They were every day pushing the bounds of what it means to be a master at something. And I think when you're in an impressionable stage and as young as 12, watching that really has an impact on you. So you begin to understand what excellence stands for, right? And the pain that comes with it. Because going from it's like in school, right? Going from 80 to 95 can happen, but 95 to 99 is the toughest stretch, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that part of my life growing up really taught me what it means to aim for mastery and really use deliberate practice in that. The second half, I feel, of who I stand for comes from the fact that both my grandmothers were founders of companies. And in fact, my grandmother, she did not even complete college, and yet she started the business which became our family legacy, which was our exports business. And she actually started it from a garage, like many other founders that we see today. And she was heading a factory which had about 600 workers. And she even, in fact, supplied goods, etc., to the Football World Cup back in the day. And I feel like for me, like people say they hear folklores of heroes. For me, these folklores growing up was how my grandmother fought off the labor union.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like those were, I think, the stories. So I think this, for me, growing up, these were the two things, which is mastery and hustle. And when somehow you combine the ability to be playful with life alongside standards of excellence, that's what creates a beautiful existence.
Yeah. Do you think having female role models in particular helped you in that process? Because usually, people talk about their grandfathers having done this and that.
Yeah.
You're talking about a story based in India when it's probably relatively unconventional, at the very least uncommon for a female person to be a founder. Do you think that helped you a lot?
Absolutely. I think that I truly believe that it's hard to be what you can't see, right? Like, how are you going to envision to be something you've just never seen? And I feel both the male and the female have a part to play in this, right? Because one is you watching your grandmother and your mother. My mother is also a vegan chef who has her, own business. But I've also had fathers and grandfathers who've really been supportive to the point where they left their jobs to help my mother and grandmother build their businesses. Yeah. So I think the push comes from both, where you see both these genders work together as a team.
Yeah. So mindset coaching, how did you end up in the career of a mindset coach? What does it even mean?
That's a really good question. So I think mindset coaching for me happened because I'm a big sucker for reframing narratives. That's something that I've applied in my life before I started to offer it to other people around me. And a small example of that, for example, would be I'm a deferred candidate for my MBA. I was supposed to be doing my MBA last year, but I couldn't because COVID struck and funds couldn't come through. And I remember in that moment, I knew I had two ways to go about it. We all, at the end of the day, are living, breathing stories, right? And it's about which is the story you're telling yourself, is it empowering or is it a disempowering one? Yeah. And one way I could have seen it is, oh gosh, I'm delayed by 1 year, and now I'm a deferred candidate. Now, I'm so much in begrudging mode, and why me, right? And look at all my batchmates still doing their MBA, and I can see their Instagram stories, and that doesn't help.
Yeah.
And then the second part of me said, what if I treat this as almost a boon that was given to me so that I can get funding for myself? So actually I get to reapply for all scholarships, and the scholarship that I did not get the year before, which was the 4-day fellowship, I actually reapplied for that and I got it.
Oh, that's smart. So you have admissions, so you can stop worrying about that part, which usually takes up most of the time, and now focus on funding because you have a year to make it even better.
Yeah, and now think about it. If my mindset in that moment was, oh gosh, I'm just going to sit here and complain for a year, vis-a-vis, let's make this a challenge. How do I get more funding for myself? And this opportunity, so seeing it as an opportunity rather than something that's forced on me and now I have to live with it, right? So I think for me, I've done that not just then, I've done it growing up as well. And that trial and error of doing it in my own life had such beautiful returns that I began to study deeper into it, and I realized mindset is the 0th step of everything we do, right? Because we think it before we ever act, right? And so it's the story that you tell yourself, and that creates how your persona and how you show up to the world around you.
What do you do as a mindset coach for other people? I suppose you work with audiences. Is that a group of 10 people or 300?
Okay, so I think I do 3 kinds of formats, right? One is a one-to-one and individual format, where it's really about the unique trajectory of that human, right? Because we're all built so differently. Second is team coaching, which is usually in corporate setups where I'm focusing on that because, for example, an early stage startup is very different from a high growth startup, right? Or a seed stage startup. Every company requires something else in its life cycle stage. And even within that, every team needs something else. So a sales team in an early growth startup requires something else from the tech team in that startup. So really understanding what that team or that company needs in terms of the mindset so that they can grow better. For example, if salespeople don't have the mindset of a hustler or a hunter, it can be very hard to create value at work, right? And if the coders are less about, testing and more about hustle, that's not going to help.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I haven't actually thought about things that way. Would you say, as a mindset coach, people who are developers, who might be, more on the introverted side, can shift easily, or do you think it displays strength in character if they can? Should people shift back and forth between different roles?
I think that's an interesting question. I do believe that we live in a world today where resilience is almost a part of our regular job description now, with the world changing the way it is. Regardless of which role you play today, internally being able to shift between narratives of your own self is very important, so that I think the litmus test becomes, as I enter this room, which narrative is going to, be the most empowering. It's almost like a question you ask yourself regularly. Instead of being like, this is my mindset for life. That's not true. You almost walk out of your house every single day with a slightly tweaked mindset based on what you just experienced.
On this journey of being a mindset coach, is there something interesting or unusual that you've discovered?
Okay, so I think most of my work has been with millennials and Gen Zs, right? And when you think about millennials and Gen Zs, the one differentiating factor from the Gen Xers before, or the baby boomers, is that we don't just know about the lives of neighbors around us or the neighbors' kids or our cousins. We know about the success of every single human out there, right? And somehow the ones we see are always at the extremes of the bell curve, right? Even though most of us probably lie in the middle of that performance bell curve, the stories we hear are either about the prodigies and the multimillionaires at 13 now, and then there are the other side, which are the extreme, sort of almost outcasts in terms of, performance and success. And we get extremely caught up in this element of, how do we match up? How do we keep pace? And I think working with this generation, what I've really begun to understand is mindset really determines, and I was thinking about these things, our life is filled with 3 elements. The way we show up to a boardroom, the way we show up to a classroom, and the way we show up to a living room. And if we think of life built in these 3 rooms, right? It really, what matters when you're entering that room is how are you measuring your success when you show up to that room? When, let's say, you walk into a boardroom and after an hour of a meeting, you walk out. What is Rosin asking himself? And what are the metrics he's setting for him that did you succeed or not? And it's in the measures of success that mindset gets determined. So I'll give you a quick example. If you enter a boardroom with an element, or let's say you enter a classroom tomorrow, you're doing an MBA yourself. So you enter a classroom and this professor is talking. And your metric of success is constantly, how do I make that ingenuous remark? Or how do I ask that ingenuous question so that everybody's gasping by straws?
I think you're describing me.
So let's say that's there, right? Yeah. And so constantly through the room, through that 1 hour, your focus is not on what's being taught, except it's on how can I make my presence felt, or how do I just say that one thing that's going to make everybody gasp. On the other hand, imagine changing that metric of success to saying, when I walk out of this room, I'm going to ask myself, what are the 3 new, fantastic insights I got today?
Yeah.
And so through the class, all you're thinking about is learning rather than sort of validation or proving yourself, right? Similarly, when you enter a boardroom, if you replace recognition with impact, saying, when I walk into this room today in this meeting, how am I creating impact vis-a-vis how am I getting recognized, right? The way you measure changes the way you show up. And the third, I would say, is the living room. And I think that's so important, is the biggest currency you can offer another human is your presence. And sometimes when you walk into conversations with agenda, you're constantly cutting people in between. Second, almost pre-guessing what they're going to say. And honestly, you don't know what they're going to say. Only they know what they're going to say. So I think presence over agenda. So I would say these 3 elements of changing your metrics across these 3 rooms can really change the way you live and show up to the world.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you think similar principles apply in personal life and in business?
Absolutely. I feel more presence never hurt anyone, right?
Yeah.
And more learning and more impact. If you look at all these 3 things, all 3 are super important to millennials and Gen Zs, because we're the generation which is finally asking ourselves, but why? And with that comes our responsibility to change the way we show up to the world in these 3 ways of learning, impact, and presence.
Yeah.